The red dust danced in the sunbeams filtering through the acacia branches. Kai crouched, as still as the petrified termite mound beside him. Two golden eyes flickered with mirrored tension. His lioness, Xylan, was a phantom in the tall grass. A flicker of the ear, the merest twitch of a whisker, and she'd vanish again before their prey. A nervous young kudu even sensed her presence. Kai had more in common with Xylan than any of the village folk. He'd been raised among the pride, learning the silent language of shifting weight, subtle scent changes, the near-invisible signals that telegraphed her intent. Humans were weak, slow, so easily broken. But with his pride, his family, he was stronger. The bond, forged in the desperation of a dying planet, was their way of surviving, an alliance born of necessity. A flicker of movement, a flash of spotted flank, and the kudu bolted. Xylan erupted from the grass, a streak of golden fury. Kai didn't cheer, didn't cry out like the others did during the hunt. This was an understanding as old as time itself, predator and prey, the cycle of life and death. His role was simple: wait for the signal, then retrieve what they could of the carcass before the hyenas came. That night, crouched around the meager fire, Kai ate with his pride. His fingers, toughened and scarred, tore strips of meat just as neatly as Xylan's fangs. Her eyes, the deep gold of the setting sun, followed him. His people, even his own mother, kept a wary distance from the lions. They didn't see the purring rumble when he scratched under a tawny chin, or the soft thumps of their tails as they ate their fill. He knew what they whispered: unnatural, dangerous, a mistake waiting to happen. He ignored them. Their village was a scattering of huts, a testament to human resilience, but a feeble one. The lions, with their rippling muscles and quiet power, were far more real. Out on the savannah, under the vast tapestry of stars, there were no whispers of humans and lions, just the night wind, the crackling fire, and the soft breaths of his sleeping pride surrounding him. It was enough. Before dawn, the whispers reached even this remote corner of their world. Not the night breeze, but something that sang with wrongness. Kai sat bolt upright, Xylan's rumbling growl echoing his own unease. They topped a rise, and he froze. It was like nothing Earth had ever birthed. A metal behemoth, the color of an angry storm cloud, hung in the air. Below it, the acacia trees were flattened, the watering hole charred. Smaller forms, alien and insect-like, swarmed the ground. He knew this wrongness by instinct, by the low whimpers of his pride, hackles raised. Here was a predator greater than any they'd faced, one carrying the stench of the cold stars. The earth seemed to hold its breath, and all Kai could hear was the pounding of his own heart. The alien figures spotted him. Weapons, sleek and unfamiliar, rose as one. Kai's fingers tightened on his worn spear, but he made no move to attack. He'd felt the bite of blaster fire before poachers desperate for a trophy to sell on the black markets. This was different, though. Heavier, colder. He saw the intent in their multifaceted eyes, the certainty of predators facing easy prey. They spoke, but the language was a series of clicks and harsh chirps that scraped at his ears. Xylan hissed, a full-throated warning, and her brother Jabari materialized from the rocks, a younger version of his sister, but no less formidable. Their roars echoed across the savannah, a wild chorus met only with the metallic clicks of weapons being readied. His mother emerged from their hut, her face a mask of strained calm. "Kai, come back. Do not provoke them." The village was on full alert now, but their spears and slingshots were a child's game against this threat. Then the behemoth in the sky moved. A shimmering beam lanced down, searing the earth where he'd stood moments before. Xylan launched herself into its path, teeth bared, but the beam was insubstantial against her charge. It simply passed through her image, leaving behind only the smell of ozone and a ripple of unease. A projection, a show of force. Kai gritted his teeth. They were being studied, tested. The air hummed, and a small sphere drifted towards them, bobbing gently. His mother gasped, tried to pull him away, but curiosity, and something akin to defiance, held him rooted. The sphere pulsed with soft light, and a voice spoke, not in clicks, but a harsh imitation of his own tongue. "Submit. You are no threat." Resistance means annihilation. He knew the word annihilation. It had echoed through the messages General Zara broadcast, even out here, a gruff voice promising unity and retribution. The earth belonged to humans, that's what she said. But looking up at that metal behemoth, the words echoed hollowly. He glanced at Azali, her fur bristling. The lions weren't submitting either. As if in response to his thought, the sphere pulsed again, this time projecting an image. Humans in tattered clothes being herded away by aliens. Villages aflame, and above it all a single, monstrous figure, a lion, eyes burning red, under the command of an alien overlord. "This is your past," the voice stated, the crude speech filled with amusement. "This is what you will become if you defy us." Kai's hand found the spear again. It was a foolish gesture, but fury sang through him. Past? This was a lie. His pride was his family, his guardians in a dying world, not tools of oppression. Before he could give in to the recklessness rising in him, his mother hissed his name. She touched his arm, and he saw the fear in her eyes, fear for him, for the village. They were outmatched, outgunned. And the alternative, the images of subjugation, they struck too close to the truth of the poachers, even if these aliens were nothing alike. Swallowing his pride, Kai nodded. His mother let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for a long time. As if waiting for his decision, the sphere pulsed again, projecting two words. "Your leader." Those two stark words hung in the air longer than any alien weapon. He was their leader, in a way. His people, even his mother, looked to him for guidance when it came to the lions. But this, he glanced at the behemoth above its scale, was inconceivable, its power chillingly obvious. His mother spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. "Zara, you must speak to General Zara." Of course, General Zara. Her broadcasts were inescapable. Whispers of rebellion, of old satellites salvaged to spread a message of unity. She'd sounded so strong, so defiant, on those old, crackly recordings his mother clung to. Yet, their village remained isolated, hiding in the vastness of what had once been teeming with vibrant life. He hesitated, then turned to Azali. She brushed against him, a warm current against his bare legs. He closed his eyes for a moment, imagining their world without her, without the rumbling purrs and the fierce loyalty of the pride. Then he nodded again, more resolutely this time. The sphere, their constant observer, pulsed. An alien emerged from the belly of the behemoth, its segmented form moving almost comically on spindly legs. It regarded him with the same dispassionate curiosity as one might a particularly intriguing insect specimen. "Follow," the voice crackled, the approximation of speech somehow even more eerie now that a source was visible. He didn't have a choice. With a final look at his mother, a touch more reassuring than he truly felt, Kai followed. His spear felt impossibly primitive in his hand, but he clung to it as the gleaming underside of the alien ship enveloped him in cold, artificial light. Inside, the sterility was overwhelming. The air was too cold, the light too harsh. He was led down a long metallic corridor and deposited in a bare room. The alien clicked and chirped at a smooth panel, and seconds later, an image flickered into being a woman. She was older than any woman he'd seen in the village, battle-hardened, yet with a kind of grim determination that sent a flicker of recognition through him. This was General Zara, the voice of the scattered remnants of humanity. Yet here she seemed small, distant, constrained within the confines of the image. "Kai," she spoke, her voice raspy but strong. "The report wasn't clear. You have lions." Her statement wasn't a question, but something in the way she said lions, a flicker of revulsion and suspicion, echoed the whispers of his own village, the uneasy alliance born of desperation. "They protect us," he countered, keeping his voice steady. Zora's eyes, a faded blue, studied him closely. "Protection can be a kind of ownership, boy. Do you understand the threat these aliens represent? They won't see your bond. They'll see a weapon that needs to be controlled." For the first time, fear snaked through him, a fear colder than the alien ship. His pride wasn't a weapon, they were. The image wavered. "Kai?" Can you hear me? We're losing the signal. With one last burst of static, the general's image vanished, leaving him alone in the sterile room, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. He wasn't sure how much time passed. Hours? Days? The sterile room remained the same, featureless, cold, devoid of any indication of the world outside. They offered him sustenance, a foul-smelling paste that he refused even after a knot of hunger settled in his stomach. Xylan was in his thoughts, a constant ache. Were they afraid, confused by his disappearance? His mother's worn face surfaced, a mix of worry and stoic acceptance. He paced the confines of his prison, restless as a caged animal. Finally, the door hissed open. One of the insectoid aliens stood before him, this one with a device clasped in its multi-jointed forearms. "Time to earn your freedom," the voice rasped, and the device hummed, projecting a fractured image. It was his village, or rather, what remained of it. Charred huts, bodies lying in the dirt, but no lions. His heart constricted, his breath coming in agonized gasps. The village elder, the wizened woman who told him stories of the world before as a babe, lay crumpled amidst the wreckage. "Your fault," the alien chirped, the crude translation carrying a sickening satisfaction. "Distraction. Your beast love made you blind. A pity." A sob tore out of Kai's throat, laced with a fury so hot it burned away the numbing horror. The spear was still in his hand, a crude weapon, but it felt incandescent with a need for vengeance. Blindly, he lunged. The segmented legs turned out to be surprisingly nimble. The creature darted back, clicking in a staccato rhythm that might have been alarm. Kai didn't care. He vaulted over a fallen bench, his roar echoing in the too clean air. He knew he was likely charging to his death, but the burning rage eclipsed all rational thought. Two more aliens materialized, weapons raised. His spear might as well have been a stick in the face of their sleek blasters, but he didn't stop. He thought of his mother, of the elders, of Xylan, no doubt lost too amidst the carnage. He thought of the pride that was his heart, his soul, the last true connection to the living world he might have had. The world erupted in a flash of red, hot pain. His vision blurred, and his last thought as he crumpled to the metal floor had nothing to do with tactics or resistance. It was Xylan's name, a desperate scream against the encroaching darkness. The darkness held him for an eternity. Every ragged breath was an agony, a fiery lance through his chest. He tried to move, to clench his fists, but his body screamed in protest. Then came the whispers, not in his ears, but deep within his own fractured mind. Xylan's rumbling purr, the gentle brush of fur he suddenly craved, and an undercurrent of pure rage, an echoing of his own scream as he fell. Was she dying too? Had the aliens? He tried to force his eyes open, but his eyelids felt weighted down with a mountain's burden. Yet, beneath the pain, a cold realization seeped through. He wasn't dead. They hadn't finished him off. They wanted him alive. A groan, almost animalistic, escaped his lips. Something cold and wet pressed against his face, and he flinched instinctively before reason caught up. Water. He was parched, his throat as scorched as the savannah in the height of the sun. He managed a single shaky sip, then another, until he could breathe without feeling, as though his lungs were filled with fire. Finally, his eyes fluttered open. The harsh lights of the alien ship stabbed at him, but his vision gradually cleared. He was still in a room, larger than the one before. Yet, amidst the sleek metallic surfaces was the one thing that made his heart clench with desperate relief: Xylan. She was limping, a crimson stain marring her golden fur, but her eyes, those fierce, beautiful eyes, were fixed on him. Next to her stood Jabari, tense but unharmed. His relief washed over him in a wave, sapping what strength remained in his broken body. The door opened, and one of the insectoid aliens entered. This one moved slower, its clicking not as sharp. "You live," the chirped translation emerged, and the creature seemed, puzzled, "unusually strong, for your kind." Kai found his voice, rough and barely a whisper. What about the village? He dreaded the answer, but couldn't bear the uncertainty. The alien tilted its chitinous head. reduced. Survivors taken for study. Taken, not dead. His mother might still be breathing, might be huddled among other terrified humans, just as he was here. His relief was a bitter pill, but there was fire left in him yet. Not dead. Then, they made a mistake leaving him alive. The lions, he began, then coughed, trying to work moisture back into his throat. They won't obey you. The alien stared at him for a long moment, then clicked a command. The device it carried before hummed to life. His stomach twisted. Images of what they'd done to his village burned behind his eyes. But it wasn't his village. It was Earth, or part of it anyway. Cities like he'd only glimpsed in the faded picture books, the elder possessed towering, impossibly vast, and reduced to rubble. Blasts of energy arced across the ruins, not against a human army, but flickering around lions. They were thin, ragged, some bearing the same strange red glow as those in his mind's eye, but they fought with desperate ferocity. Chaos, the alien finally rasped. Your world, it birthed chaos. Chaos. That single word echoed in Kai's mind, a bitter reflection of their own struggle. He thought of the ruined Earth, the desperate alliance forged in a dying world. They'd harness chaos, or rather, learn to exist alongside it, an unpredictable and often dangerous partnership. He glanced at Xylan, who'd finally ceased her restless pacing and lay with her head resting on her massive paws. Her eyes never left him, mirroring the same protective fury he felt bubbling in his own veins. You call it chaos, he spat, his voice still a broken rasp. We call it survival. This time, the alien took longer to respond. It seemed to be thinking. A ludicrous notion, considering the immense gulf between their species. And then, the words came, slower, as if the creature were choosing them with a strange, newfound caution. Unexpected, it chirped. Predators tamed. A flawed design, but useful. The others will exploit. Control. He blinked slowly. Was the alien warning him? Was there dissent amongst them? It didn't matter. His village was likely in another ship, his mother another prisoner. The rage was his only fuel now, but he curbed it, forcing it into a cold calculation. Show me, he rasped. Show me the others. The creature surprised him again by moving aside. It gestured to the humming device and projected a vast room, row upon row of containment cells. Within them were humans, ragged with fear and exhaustion, their eyes filled with a desperate, defiant light that he understood in his bones. His mother's worn but still strong face flashed amongst them, and relief threatened to overwhelm him again. He squashed it down. They were alive, but far from safe. The alien spoke again, its tone changing again, tinged with what sounded suspiciously like satisfaction. A gift, human. You will understand when the time comes. Your bond, it may be useful to us. Before he could react or question further, the creature scuttled away, leaving him alone with his roaring thoughts and sleeping lions. He closed his eyes, Xylan's rumbling purr a soothing balm against the cold certainty in the alien's final words. They did not bring him back here to die. They thought they had a use for him, for the lions. A chill trickled down his spine. They saw him as his own people did, even those he'd considered allies, with a mixture of fear, distrust, and grudging necessity because of the lions. Now, his alien captors seemed to mirror those views. A gift. They thought his bond with his pride was a weapon at best, something to be manipulated at worst. His chest tightened with a mix of disgust and a dawning, dangerous understanding. They'd made a grave mistake, underestimating not only the lions, but perhaps his capacity for chaos as well. The days blurred into a monotonous cycle. They fed him, crude sustenance that at least kept him alive. His wounds, blaster burns that would leave vicious scars, were treated with clinical efficiency, yet with no hint of kindness. Xylan and Jabari were kept nearby, and their presence was the only thing keeping him from slipping into a despairing rage. The aliens came with increasing frequency, always with the humming device he'd come to loathe. Images of Earth in various stages of ruin flickered, the cities laid waste, the forests ablaze. It was a deliberate torment, a reminder of his world's fragility, a wordless threat held over him. They studied the lions too, their gazes lingering on the way. Xylan pressed close to him, the protectiveness gleaming in Jabari's eyes as he paced the confines of the metal cage they shared. Occasionally, they'd prod at the sleeping beasts, as if testing for a breaking point. The lions tolerated this with low, rumbling growls, their unease mirroring his own. And through it all, there was the constant demand. More a concept than truly decipherable words: show, control, bond. The aliens wanted him to parade his alliance, his friendship, with the lions as proof of their potential as weapons. A knot of disgust burned in his throat. He remained stubbornly silent, ignoring their demands, refusing to give them any more than they already had. They changed tactics. Then, one day, they brought him out of his cell, down long, sterile corridors filled with a strange hum, to a large, open chamber. Dozens of other aliens were there, their multifaceted eyes fixed on him, a mix of fear and fascination in their clicking and chirping. And at the far end of the chamber, behind a force shield he could feel thrumming in the air, a human stood. Zara, his voice cracked with surprise and disuse. Despite her stoic demeanor in the broadcasts, there was a haunted look in their leader's eyes. Her uniform was filthy, and one arm hung limp at her side. He swallowed the bile rising in his throat. This wasn't a reunion, it was a demonstration. "Speak to them, boy," one of the aliens rasped in his ear. "Show them the power of your alliance. Only then will cooperation begin." He said nothing, staring at Zara. Her face remained carefully blank, save for the faintest flicker of understanding, recognition. He saw the echo of his own silent refusal. An alien prodded him roughly, and pain shot through him. He stumbled forward, hissing in fury and frustration. They wanted a show, and they likely didn't care how they got it. Glancing over at the lions, he saw why they were so eager. Xylan was snarling, eyes blazing a molten gold, teeth bared in an unmistakable warning. Jabari echoed her fury, a cacophony of sound that sent shivers down the spines of even the cold-eyed aliens. Suddenly, a strange sense of calm washed over him. Fear mingled with an almost desperate resolve. They wanted control. They wanted a weapon. He turned towards the aliens, every bit of hatred and defiance he'd kept in check seeping into his gaze, and he began to speak. He'd forgotten the sound of his own voice, how rough and unused it was after the enforced silence. His words began as halting whispers, but gained strength as fury fueled them. "You think they are weapons?" Kai spat, motioning towards the snarling lions. "You think they are mine to command? You see this?" He gestured to the scars, the barely healed wounds. "And think it is control?" The aliens clicked and chirped amongst themselves, but their translator devices remained oddly silent. Perhaps his words were beyond their limited grasp of human language, or perhaps the rage twisting his features was its own universal translation. "We survived together," he continued, stronger now, drawing Zara's gaze to meet his own. "We have forged a bond, yes, but you see it through your own lens of destruction, of dominance. You cannot comprehend that these creatures, who could tear me apart in an instant, choose loyalty instead. It is a bond you, who enslave and destroy, cannot begin to comprehend." A tremor ran through him, exhaustion threatening to overtake him. But he forced himself to stand tall, to meet the cold gazes of the aliens head-on. "They are not weapons," he roared, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "They are my family. You have taken everything. You have shown me your power, the ruin you brought upon my home. But you see this bond, this trust, and you don't understand." Xylan let out a chilling roar, a call that seemed to shake the very foundations of the alien ship. He took a step forward, drawing closer to the force field, closer to where Zara stood with unwavering determination. "You want a weapon? You want a demonstration of power?" Kai's voice was raw with emotion now, echoing a despair that he could no longer contain. "You will have it, but it won't be what you expect. This isn't about lions, or even about the humans you took prisoner. This is about what makes you weak, about the fear that drives you to subjugate everything and everyone you encounter." He turned away from the aliens, away from their clicking hisses of confusion and alarm. He looked at Zara, looking truly at her for what felt like the first time. In her lined face, he saw reflected his own desperate resolve. "General," he began, and his voice cracked slightly before it steadied again. "Give the order. Order a full retreat, abandon all positions on Earth. You speak of unity, General, but it means nothing without sacrifice. Leave my world while there is still something left to salvage, or the chaos you despise will finally consume you." His words hung in the air, a stunned silence echoing around the chamber. He didn't know if Zara truly had the means to contact other human survivors, if any were even left. It was a madman's bluff born of desperation, but in this gamble lay their only chance. After what seemed like an eternity, Zara spoke. "You asked the impossible, boy." Her voice was hoarse, filled with a weariness deeper than even the exhaustion etched into her face. "Possible and necessary," he countered. It was a slim hope, a flickering light in a sea of darkness, but the alternative, to become mere puppets for alien overlords, was unthinkable. The insectoid creatures surged forward, their segmented bodies a wave of chitin against the force field. The translation crackled to life, frantic and piercing. Treason? They conspire? Betrayal? Zara stood like an oak tree in a windstorm. She turned her weary gaze toward the aliens, but spoke in clear, uncrackled human speech that echoed the defiance fueling Kai. "He asks what you have not earned." The air crackled. The force field shimmered and flickered as if the very machinery struggled under the weight of two wills refusing to bend. "You come with weapons," Zara continued, her voice rising like a battle cry. "You offer false bargains of peace. What can you truly offer a species that clings to survival itself?" "This boy," she gestured towards Kai, and a ripple of surprise ran through the aliens. "He understands this. The bond he shares with these creatures, it speaks of something you lack. Understanding. Mercy, perhaps. Even the slimmest notion that not every world must bend to your will." Kai felt a strange kinship with this woman he barely knew. She didn't echo his words, didn't play to his last-ditch gamble. But in her refusal to cower, in the quiet strength echoing his own, he sensed the possibility of a true alliance. The alien leader he had begun to distinguish the subtle differences in their carapace that seemed to denote rank surged forward. "Enough," it shrieked, the translation device struggling to keep up with its high-pitched rage. "This is madness, mutiny. We will subdue them, control them. Our victory is assured." Yet, in its frantic pronouncements, Kai heard something else. A crack in its voice, a hiss that wasn't of triumph, but of fear. It echoed the fear in his own heart, the fear mirrored in the restless pacing of Azali and the narrowed eyes of Jabari. But within that fear lay a flicker of opportunity. "Control?" Kai spat, playing his part in the growing pandemonium. "You control nothing. You will leave my planet or," his voice faltered, then steadied, "or you will face the true chaos of a species with nothing left to lose." He saw Zara then, saw the ghost of a smile touch her lips, fleeting and gone in an instant as the air of the chamber hummed with dangerous energy. She reached for something at her waist, a device he hadn't noticed before, and her words were a command that cut through the growing chaos. "Override Code Omega. Retreat protocols commence. Authorization, Zara." The impact was immediate. Lights flickered and died, alarms blared a discordant symphony that echoed the rising panic of the aliens. Around them, the ship seemed to wake to something other than the insect creature's control. Systems sputtered and sparked, and the force field holding him separated from Zara shimmered before vanishing altogether. The alien leader let out a piercing screech, more animalistic than any sound the lions had yet made. It brandished a weapon he hadn't seen before, but Zara was faster. The device flew from her hand and struck its chest, sending it reeling back. "Kai," Zara's voice was urgent and strained. "The lions, they're your best hope of escape. We will distract them." He barely had time to process her meaning before Azali was at his side. Her roar split the air, a challenge and a protective cry all in one. Jabari closed in on his other side, and for the first time, Kai felt the lions as an extension of himself. the fear in his heart mirroring the fear and fury he felt echoing in their own. The aliens surged towards them, weapons raised, but the chaos Zara had unleashed was their greatest weapon. Panels on the walls sparked and smoked, doorways hissed open to reveal unseen passages, and the very floor beneath them seemed to ripple and groan with misdirected energy. He hesitated, torn between the instinct to stay and fight alongside Zara, this woman who'd suddenly ignited a battle he didn't quite understand, but knew they needed to capitalize on. Then her voice, ragged but resolute, pierced the din. "Go. Survive. That is an order, soldier." He didn't look back. He had no time for farewells. Xylan and Jabari sensed his urgency, and he ran beside them as the fabric of the alien ship seemed to unravel around them. Alarms wailed, orders barked in the chirping alien tongue. It was a desperate flight, a chase through corridors bathed in flashing red emergency lights. When they finally found an escape route, a smaller ship docked at the underbelly of the larger craft, the chaos had reached a fever pitch. Smoke choked the air, and he saw flashes of energy weapons fire back and forth, a chaotic battle playing out on a stage that was threatening to crumble beneath their feet. But the escape ship, untouched and sleek, was a beacon of cold, metallic promise. He didn't need prompting. Survival was all that mattered, and it was all they knew. With a final roar that was as much a goodbye as a rallying cry, he sprinted toward the craft, the rumble of Xylan's purr echoing the pounding of his own heart. The escape ship was a marvel and a curse. His hands fumbled with unfamiliar controls, guided by instincts more than true knowledge. There were no screens showing his village, no reassuring voice of General Zara, just the endless void of space stretching out before him. Xylan and Jabari pressed themselves close, their forms comforting weights in the sterile, too small interior of the craft. He wasn't sure how long it took, hours, days, a lifetime before the alien mothership was just a speck in the distance. Only then did his shaking hands relinquish their death grip on the pilot's yoke. Only then did the choked sobs threatening to consume him break free. Tears streamed down his face, a mix of grief, relief, and a bone-deep weariness that settled into his very soul. Ahead of them, Earth loomed. It wasn't the vibrant images from his mother's books, but a broken and scarred thing against the vast tapestry of stars. Yet it was home. He coaxed the small ship closer, aiming not for his ruined village, but towards a sliver of green still visible among the blasted and desolate landscape. Xylan pressed her large head into his lap, her gaze fixed out the viewport. He knew she mirrored his pain, his uncertainty. Would there be anyone left? Would his mother recognize the man he'd become? More importantly, would his people accept him alongside these fierce companions he refused to think of as weapons, even now? Hours later, the ship hummed to a stop, the jolt of landing bringing him back to the harsh reality of his mission. He'd escaped, but Zara still remained, and with her, countless others. He refused to believe her gambit had been entirely suicidal. She had a plan. She always did. But it was a plan for which he now bore an immense responsibility. The hatch hissed open, and the familiar scent of dust and dry earth washed over him. Xylan emerged first, a low growl rumbling in her throat at the ruined landscape. It echoed his own pain, amplified by the strange, almost feral energy that had settled deep within him. Jabari followed, sniffing the air, his eyes gleaming with a mix of curiosity and wariness. Kai took a step into the world he once knew. It was changed, forever marked by the scar of alien invasion, and he was changed with it. The boy who ran with his lions replaced with a man tempered in an alien crucible. The full weight of what he had to do to rebuild, to warn, perhaps even to fight again seemed to press the very air out of his lungs. Then a cry cut through the quiet, ragged and disbelieving. "Kai?" He turned and saw his mother, old beyond her years, standing atop a rise amongst what remained of their village. There was fear in her eyes, yes, but also a flicker of the fierce protectiveness he'd always known mirrored in his companions. She saw them, all of them, and she waited. It would take time, perhaps a lifetime, to forge a true alliance between the remnants of humanity and the lions who shared their broken world. But the first step was clear. Jabari nudged him forward, and Azali brushed against him, her purr a deep, resonating sound that spoke of patience and unwavering support. He stepped forward towards his mother, towards an uncertain future. But this time, he did not walk alone. Days turned into weeks. The village was a shadow of its former self, a cluster of makeshift shelters amidst the ruins. His mother had aged a decade more. He bore the scars and the haunted eyes of a soldier he never wanted to be. The elders regarded the lions with distrust, whispering the old accusations of unnatural bonds and dangerous alliances. Yet, there was also a sliver of grim respect in their stares, an acknowledgement that without these golden-eyed predators, they wouldn't have survived at all. He spent his days in a strange limbo, hunting alongside Azali, learning the scarred contours of their ravaged land, while the nights were filled with whispered plans alongside his mother and the few others who grasped the looming threat. The escape ship offered them something no one had possessed in years: information. The alien language still eluded them, but maps, navigation charts, and endless scans of other star systems painted a bleak picture. The invaders, the ones they now simply referred to as the Xylan, were thorough, meticulous in their conquests. World after world fell under their relentless advance. Earth, it seemed, had only been a minor blip in their inexorable expansion. The broadcast began with hesitant whispers, relayed from old, salvaged equipment rigged together to mimic Zara's network. His voice was hesitant at first, the words choked out, barely contained fury warring with a grief that threatened to consume him. But he spoke of Zara's sacrifice, of the alien ship's chaotic retreat, of the power of bonds that transcended the need for dominance. "They will return," his voice echoed from shattered speakers, carried on the wind across the wasteland, stronger and more determined to break us. "But we will not fall. We will not run. We will fight, and in fighting, we will become something they do not expect. Humans, with lions at our side." His mother watched him then, the fear in her eyes edged with a kind of grim pride. The broadcasts grew stronger, sharper. He shared rudimentary battle tactics, gleaned from alien simulations he barely understood, teaching how to outsmart enemies who relied on overwhelming force. He spoke of ambushes and traps, of utilizing the broken terrain they knew so intimately. And slowly, the whispers echoed back to him. Not just whispers of fear, but whispers of defiance. Small bands of survivors, hidden and desperate, began to emerge. It was the barest flicker of hope, but hope nonetheless. Kai found he could still smile, the curve of his lips shaky but genuine. It was on those days, when the weight of war was briefly forgotten, that he truly felt like himself again. The feel of Azali's fur, warm and rough beneath his calloused hands, was a soothing balm to his restless soul. Jabari, once a young lion, now almost a full-grown male, paced the perimeter of their crude camp, his low rumbling growl a protective chant even in these brief moments of peace. "They listen," his mother said one evening, her voice barely above a whisper. The sky above pulsed with unfamiliar stars, a testament to their displacement. "Some do," he rasped, his heart aching for those who still chose to hide, those too afraid to take up arms even for survival. "It is enough," she murmured, a hint of the iron will he'd inherited shining in her eyes. "There was doubt about you, Kai. About them." She gestured towards Azali, dozing with her massive head resting on her paws. "It will linger, but there is also respect. Fear that they will never lose, but they begin to see what Zara saw. The war, when it came, wasn't the grand clash they'd imagined. There were no pitched battles, no desperate charges into blaster fire. Their enemy, the Xylan, were too organized, too methodical for that. Instead, it was a series of raids, surgical strikes that bled them with calculated cruelty." His broadcasts became warnings, his voice tense as he relayed coordinates, descriptions of troop movements, the cold, hard estimations of where the enemy would land next. Outposts fell, flickering lights of human settlements snuffed out across the ravaged earth. His voice cracked with each loss, but he kept speaking, fueled by an anger that was both a fire and a shield against the encroaching despair. The lions became something out of nightmares, not the monstrous weapons the Xylan had first envisioned, but specters haunting the alien squads. An ambush from the shadows, a strike too fast to effectively target, and then nothing. Only the aftermath of savaged bodies, a brutal message they couldn't fully decipher. He grew thinner, his warrior's strength fueled by a dwindling supply of food and a relentless fear clawing at his insides. Yet, beside him, Xylan seemed to thrive. The hunted had become the hunter, her golden eyes gleaming brighter with each kill. Sometimes he saw in her a reflection of the fury he'd unleashed within himself, a darkness mirroring the coldness growing in his own heart. It scared him, as much as the ruthless efficiency of the Xylan themselves. His mother was the counterpoint. When he raged, she was calm. When hope seemed lost, she held the memory of 1,000 small victories, isolated triumphs that amounted to nothing on the grand scale, yet meant the world to those who'd carved them out with tooth and nail. Zara's legacy, she'd say, her hand gripping his worn spear as if it were the scepter of a long-lost queen. It's the spirit that matters, not the ground we lose. We will endure. And he believed her. Because what was the alternative? Surrender, the enslavement he'd glimpsed in the cold, lifeless projections the aliens had used to try and break him. He looked at Jabari, sleek muscle and lightning-quick reflexes, and knew the lions wouldn't bend. So, neither could he. There came a night when he relayed the news, his voice barely a whisper amidst the static. They're coming here. This is their final strike. For them, it's about more than conquest. Now, they want to break what Zara started. They want to kill the symbol of resistance. Silence hung in the air, heavy and thick. Then, his mother moved, drawing herself up to her full height, withered strength defying her weariness. "Let them come," she rasped, and the fire that once burned only in her eyes had spread to the entire village. The wait, that agonizing anticipation, was the worst torture. They laid traps, sharpened spears, dug into the unforgiving earth, and they waited. His roar, when he sensed the first tremors of the alien ship's arrival, was answered by 100 defiant voices raised in defiance. A dissonant chorus, but a chorus nonetheless. The Xylan landed not with the arrogant fanfare of their first invasion, but with a quiet, unsettling efficiency. He watched them deploy from the shimmering observation sphere, now a hated beacon against the scarred landscape of Earth. Their segmented bodies moved with greater caution, weapons raised at every rustle of wind and shift of shadow. It was a victory in itself, small but undeniable. They were afraid. When the first attack came, it wasn't a shockwave of overwhelming force, but a probing vanguard meant to test their defenses. The humans hit them hard, their battle cries raw, echoing with a ferocity born from desperation. He fought like a madman, the spear a blur in his hands, the world narrowing to his ragged breathing, the stench of blaster fire, and the echoing growls of the lions at his back. They repelled the first wave, but the exhaustion settled deep, an ache in bones and soul. He scanned the ravaged battlefield, burnt, blasted patches of earth marred with the bodies of his people and the cold, metallic corpses of the invaders. Yet they had repelled them. The impossible had held. Hours became a blur. Brief respites snatched between relentless attacks. He lost track of the fallen, his voice growing hoarse as he shouted warnings and rallied the dwindling defenders. Still, they held, an impossible thorn in the Xylan war machine. Then came their ace. He saw it first on the makeshift tactical screen salvaged from the escape ship, a single vessel, larger and sleeker than any they'd faced before. It hung in the sky like a vulture, its mere presence dimming the fragile defiance flickering in the hearts of his people. Whispers reached him, words he knew to be true, even as he raged against them. Commander, High Leader. This wasn't a general, an underling following a cold calculation of conquest. This was the very architect of their suffering, here to extinguish the rebellion with its own hands. A tremor ran through him, a strange mix of fear and a perverse sliver of anticipation. Xylan stalked closer, sensing his unease. They had wounded the beast, but here was its head. To strike here, to kill this, it could shatter their relentless advance. He glanced around at the weary, but unbroken faces of his people. His mother stood resolute, lines etched into her face, spear clutched in her frail looking but unyielding hands. There was no question, only a decision. "I will face it," he spoke. It wasn't a question or a request. His voice held the unbreakable will born from staring into the abyss and refusing to turn away. The protest was immediate, rising from a dozen throats simultaneously. But his mother, always his bedrock, silenced them with a single, sharp gesture. "You are the symbol," she said simply, and in her eyes was understanding, acceptance, and a chilling echo of his own determination. Now, make them fear that symbol. They came for him as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the ruins of his village in long, grotesque shadows. Not an army, but an escort. A dozen Xylan warriors, their segmented bodies gleaming dully in the failing light. This wasn't about conquest. This was something primal, a predator come to finally crush that which dared to defy it. He stood tall as they approached, his mother at his side, her strength a silent bulwark against the rising tide of doubt. Xylan was a phantom in the deepening dusk, Jabari a sleek shadow mirroring his own tense posture. His people watched from the wreckage, their silent regard a mix of fear, awe, and a desperate hope he wasn't sure he could fulfill. The leader, taller than the others, its segmented carapace shimmering with an almost iridescent sheen, stepped forward. The translator crackled to life, hissing alien syllables that resolved into stilted but understandable human speech. "Surrender, the human known as Kai. Submit, and the rest may yet live." His mother's grip on his arm tightened, but it was Xylan's rumbling growl that echoed his own contempt. "They will live only as slaves," Kai rasped, his voice rough with exhaustion but carrying across the stillness. "You have brought ruin to my world, subjugated my people. There will be no surrender." The alien leader tilted its faceted head, a movement both insectile and chillingly curious. "You speak of bond, protection, yet you stand amidst ruins. This is your legacy? This is the power of your alliance?" Fury washed over him. "We still breathe," he spat. "We still resist. That is a power you cannot comprehend, a chaos that will be your undoing." The Xylan commander moved closer, every step precise, measured. Its weapon shimmered in the fading light, energy crackling along its length. "We will see," the translated words crackled with barely contained fury, "if your bond is stronger than the cold certainty of death." That was it. No further discussion, no negotiations. This was a duel born from hatred, a clash mirrored in the way Xylan tensed, her low snarl escalating into a chilling roar answered with a hiss from the alien ranks. His mother squeezed his hand briefly, then stepped back, her weathered face a mask of resolute despair. He knew she was already grieving, already resigning herself to his death. They circled each other. The Xylan leader was fast, shockingly so for its size, the weapon in its hands moving in blinding flashes. He twirled his spear, more instinct than training, a desperate attempt to deflect the energy blast meant to cripple and burn. He danced with death, feeling the searing heat sear his skin, smelling the acrid scent of ozone as energy arcs narrowly missed their mark. Then Xylan struck. A blur of golden fur and flashing teeth, she forced the alien commander back, the air filled with a screech of surprise and pain. She was relentless, a force of nature unleashed, pushing their enemy against the ruins of a fallen shelter. He was not idle. Driven by a desperate need to seize this opportunity, he pressed the attack, the spear a useless tool now, discarded in favor of the more primal combat he'd learned alongside the lions. He struck with fists honed by hard labor, fueled by a rage honed by a lifetime of loss. The alien leader was strong, inhumanly so, but the ferocity of Xylan's onslaught had left it wounded, off balance. His blows landed, not with the clean precision of a true fight, but with the reckless desperation of a cornered animal, and with every hit, with every grunt of exertion, he felt a flicker of a savage satisfaction. This was for his village, for Zara, for the countless faces he'd watched flicker out on alien screens. The end was messy, brutal, and punctuated by the desperate cries of his people who had surged forward, joining the fray in a chaotic symphony of violence. It wasn't a clean victory. He was half blinded, his breath's ragged gasps tasting of blood as they heaved in his burning lungs. Xylan limped, a gaping wound in her side spewing crimson onto the scorched earth. And yet, the alien leader lay still, its once iridescent shell shattered, its weapons skittering across the broken ground. Silence descended, a ringing quiet even greater than the relentless hum of alien machinery. It was broken only by the rasping breaths of the wounded and the whimpers of those mourning the freshly fallen. He knelt over the alien's corpse, not in triumph, but in grim assessment. This was a victory, a turning point perhaps, but the war was far from over. They'd sacrificed much for this sliver of hope, this bloody message scrawled in the dirt of their shattered world. Xylan pressed close, her usually bright eyes clouded with pain. He ran his hands over her wound, the fur matted and sticky. Already, he could see the infection beginning to take hold, the creeping tendrils of a poison he knew not how to combat. She nudged him gently, and he sensed more than understood her intent. She would not last long, her warrior spirit fading into the twilight. "Come," he rasped, and though his heart ached with his impossible order, he knew she would obey. It was their bond, twisted and forged in the fires of shared suffering, that made this act both a mercy and a cold-blooded necessity. He led her to the heart of the ruins, to where the makeshift command center was nestled amidst the broken walls. Crude screens still glowed, maps stained with the rust-colored dust of their world flickered across their surfaces. His mother stood there, her frail form unyielding. For the broadcast, he choked out, the unspoken plea hanging heavy. His mother understood. She moved with the silent efficiency of long practice, her hands steady as she adjusted frequencies and prepared the transmission equipment. Outside, he could hear Jabari's mournful roar, an echo of his own desolate cry as Xylan let out a final, shuddering breath. Her proud head rested on his lap, her eyes already dimming as their bond stretched thin, snapping with agonizing finality. He blinked back tears, a hot rush of grief and rage fueling his actions. When he stepped before the battered camera, when his mother's hands steadied his shaking shoulders, it wasn't Kai, the leader, who spoke. It wasn't even the son, the survivor, the grieving brother of his pride. It was the fury of a dying world made flesh. It was the defiant echo of Xylan's last roar, the cold determination born from staring down the abyss. It was the voice of 1,000 ambushes, of traps sprung, of a people who refused to be broken, even when all that remained were the shattered remnants of their souls. "They killed our commander." His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper, but it would carry. "This changes nothing. We will not yield. We will not surrender. We will fight for every inch of this broken world, and we will bury you with it. You thought us beasts to be broken. You thought our defiance a curious anomaly. You were wrong. We are human. We are lion. And we are coming for you." The broadcast became legend. The raw, unflinching broadcast of Kai, his face streaked with dust and etched with the scars of endless conflict, became a flickering beacon across the shattered remnants of Earth. The Xylan pushed harder, their attacks more brutal. They hunted him with relentless determination, the promise of ending the rebellion burning cold in their multifaceted eyes. He became a wraith, a whisper carried on the hot desert winds, the creak of ancient ruins, the rustling of a lion's mane in the dying brush. He was always moving, always fighting, even as the ranks of those who stood with him dwindled. His victories curdled into bittersweet triumph against a vast, unfeeling machine of war. Jabari grew into his power, a lone sentinel against the encroaching shadows. His roars carried the legacy of Xylan, a chilling echo that sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened human warriors. They were ruthless, cunning, a perfect mirror of the alien conquerors, and yet something vital remained within them. They did not massacre those who surrendered, but offered a choice to fight or to rebuild. His mother, always a beacon beside his flickering flame, became the architect of a different war, one waged with whispers, with salvaged equipment, with the rebuilding of a spirit the Xylan could not begin to comprehend. Outpost blossomed, hidden and tenacious, fueled by Kai's defiant voice and the quiet work of countless hands relearning long-lost skills. The fight became one of attrition, of defiant survival. It was bloody, filled with sacrifices, but slowly, with agonizing slowness, the tide began to shift. The years bled into a blurred battleground. His hair grayed, streaked with the dust of 100 battlefields. The broadcasts became less frequent, his hunts less about open defiance and more about carefully chosen targets. Yet the whispers lingered, the whispers of the Lionsender, the man who danced with the beasts who refused to be broken. Then came a transmission, carried on a frequency no Xylan could intercept. It wasn't Kai who spoke, but his mother, her voice strong despite the deepening lines etched upon her face. "The war changes," she said, her gaze holding the camera steady. "This is a message, not for the Xylan, but for our people. Kai is falling, and with him, the symbol of our open battle must change. We will not fade. We will not surrender. But we must grow roots, become unseen, untouchable. Seek shelter, rebuild, and remember, you are not alone. The fires still burn, but they burn in hidden hearths now. Tend them well." Silence fell, then a single image filled the screens, the crude outline of a lion's head, a defiant snarl etched into the dust of their battered world. It lingered, then faded, replaced by the relentless static that had become the new normal. It was the last wide transmission, the final act of the rebellion as they knew it. Yet, the war hadn't ended, it had merely changed form. Decades passed. The relentless forward march of the Xylan conquest stopped, then slowly began to recede. Their presence was an oppressive weight, their rule harsh and unyielding, but Earth itself seemed to reject them. Supply lines failed, patrols vanished in the vast landscapes, and an invisible network of resistance gnawed at their control with chilling efficiency. Hidden villages thrived, nestled in forgotten ruins or the unforgiving embrace of what remained of wilderness. Children grew up with whispered stories of the Lionsender, a figure of myth both terrifying and filled with enduring hope, and within the hearts of hardened warriors, alongside the scars of endless conflict, bloomed a quiet, unyielding belief. They hadn't won, not truly, but they hadn't lost, either. Kai changed. Some nights, after a grueling sabotage mission, a daring ambush, he'd emerge from the shadows and let Jabari find him. The great lion, aging now, was a quiet force at his side, an echo of a life that seemed both a breath and a lifetime away. It was on those nights he allowed himself a moment of grief, of loss, a silent acknowledgement of all he had become, and all he had sacrificed. He no longer sought open battle. The broadcasts ceased entirely. Instead, he was a ghost, a whisper of danger to the Xylan, and a beacon of cunning defiance to his own people. The hunters hunted him, their tactics becoming predictable, almost dull, and in that dullness he found opportunity. The trap could become a snare for the unwary. He was older than his mother had ever been, his body a network of scars and hardened muscle honed by a life on the run. Yet, in quiet moments, he sometimes envied her the peace of death. What did a life without Azali, without Zara, without the countless faces blurred by time and battle, truly mean? He didn't have an answer, only the grim certainty that to stop now was to concede a defeat that would erase all that they had sacrificed. Then came the whisper on the forbidden frequencies, carried by voices unknown. It is time. He moved like a shadow, drawn by a thread of hope so thin it might well have been an illusion. The rendezvous point was a ruin, a place he'd passed through 100 times, never seeing what now lay exposed by time and shifting sands. A cave, its entrance barely visible, and within a flicker of light. He left Jabari on the ridge, the loyal old lion a sentinel against the relentless gray of the Xylan-controlled world. Alone, he descended. The chamber was filled with figures, cloaked and masked against recognition. Humans, dozens of them, their eyes gleaming with a mix of fear, desperation, and a cold determination that mirrored his own. A woman stepped forward, her form unfamiliar, her voice artificially deepened to conceal her identity. "We have found a weakness," she said, the words echoing oddly in the ancient stone chamber. "A target too valuable to ignore. We believe, with the right push, it could force their retreat from our world." Her words ignited a mix of excitement and apprehension. He listened, his hunter's instincts honing in on the gaps in their plan, the risks inherent in such a desperate gamble. "A new high commander," the woman explained, her masked face barely moving. "Their forces are consolidating under its direct control. We have located the compound, deep within their subjugated territory. An assassination, a strike at the heart of the Xylan power structure. Audacious, reckless, perhaps a fool's errand. But after decades of playing defense, the idea of seizing the offensive was a siren song he could not ignore. And how is this weakness different from the last?" His voice echoed the doubts of a dozen silent figures surrounding him. He'd danced this dance before, promises of exposed flanks, whispers of vulnerabilities. They always led to blood, sacrifice, and the lingering bittersweet taste of victory that crumbled to ash in his hands. "This one, it understands us better." The woman's voice was tinged with a bitterness that made him sit up straighter. "It doesn't engage in the same careless sweeps, the massacres designed to break our morale. It analyzes. It seeks to comprehend the roots of our resistance, and in doing so," she paused, as if searching for the right words, "it has grown predictable." Predictable, a word full of danger and intoxicating possibility. "How?" He kept his voice flat, belying the churning turmoil within him. A figure stepped forward, pulling back their hood. It was a woman, young, with eyes that mirrored his own haunted darkness. In the harsh depths of her gaze, he saw the brutal toll resistance had taken, the relentless echoes of loss that whispered from her very soul. "They have scholars," she hissed, the word acidic on her tongue. "Twisted ones, who dissect every broadcast, every ruin of a battle. They seek patterns, logic in our defiance. This high commander, it believes we can be anticipated, boxed in. It believes itself the ultimate hunter." He felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't a mere military strategist. This was a creature intent on breaking their spirit, on reducing their desperate fight to a formula it could neatly counteract. "And this," he gestured towards the flickering tactical display the woman carried, "is the trap it believes we cannot refuse." The plan was honed with ruthless precision. A seemingly undefended convoy, carrying supplies vital to the Xylan war effort. A route too well guarded to be coincidence, designed to lure the resistance. And at the culmination point, the compound, the High Commander itself exposed, protected, but not invulnerable. It was a dare, an open challenge. He closed his eyes, seeing not the cold lines of the map, but the ghost of 100 battles. Xylan's final charge, Zara's defiant broadcasts, the haunted faces of children born into a world at war. He saw Jabari, waiting on the ridge, and a decision settled upon him with the crushing finality of a death sentence. He would lead the attack. One last desperate gamble. One last chance to turn their relentless defiance into a killing blow. The strike force was small, honed by necessity. He'd handpicked them himself, weathered veterans who carried the scars of this endless conflict in their eyes, just as he did. There were no grand speeches, no rallying cries, only the cold, quiet certainty that most of them would not see another sunrise. The convoy was a perfect snare, practically glowing with its vulnerability in the blasted desert landscape. They struck hard and fast, a whirlwind of violence echoing the tactics he'd taught them for decades. The trap sprung, Xylan reinforcements converging with terrifying speed. Yet, just as their enemy predicted, they pressed on. Driven by a desperation that went beyond the need for supplies or territory, they carved a bloody path towards the heart of the compound. The final stand was not glorious, but a brutal brawl in the dimly lit corridors of alien design. He fought his way forward, driven by an almost mindless fury, the roar of the lions lost in the cacophony of blaster fire and dying screams. The High Commander was waiting. Its faceted carapace gleamed with an unnatural iridescence in the dim light, its segmented form larger, more imposing than any he'd faced before. The chilling realization hit him. This was no mere strategist, but a warrior honed for the specific purpose of crushing him. They circled each other, and he saw the truth in the cold gleam of its multifaceted eyes. It had not merely analyzed the tactics of the resistance, it had studied him. The trap was not only the convoy or the compound, but the way it had lured them into a confrontation on the aliens' terms. The fight was a desperate, primal dance, not of skill, but of raw, brutal will. He was older, slower, his body a tapestry of wounds, yet he pressed the attack with a reckless disregard for his own life. The scholar-turned-warrior was strong, inhumanly so, its every move honed against a single opponent, him. A blaster shot tore through his shoulder, another seared his thigh, turning his world into a haze of pain and fury. He landed a vicious blow, felt the satisfying crack of alien carapace under his fist. He pressed forward, heedless of the burning in his lungs and the blinding pain of his wounds. It ended with surprising abruptness. His foe moved with blinding speed, but he was spent, his reactions dulled by exhaustion and blood loss. He stumbled, the world blurring, and the strike that fell was less a killing blow, more an act of dispassionate finality. He lay gasping in the wreckage, his vision flickering in and out of focus. The alien leader looked down at him, the gleaming facets of its eyes holding neither triumph nor hatred, only a chilling emptiness. "You fought bravely," the translator crackled, the alien's voice tinged with an unsettling echo of respect. "Your defiance was unexpected. It slowed our conquest," a gnat buzzing persistently in the ear of a greater being. He managed a strangled laugh, a wet, bloody rasp. "Gnat, that buzzed loud enough to bring you here to die." His final words hung in the air as his vision narrowed. He saw the flash of the killing blow, heard the hiss of the alien's weapon slicing through the air, and then roars, not one, but a furious cacophony. Jabari and more, a spectral pack of golden fury launched from the shadows, echoes of battles long past. The alien stumbled, taken by surprise. Its final strike went wide as the lions descended upon it. Jabari's jaws closed around its throat, and the air filled with the alien's shriek of pain and terror. In its dying struggles, it fell upon him, a final crushing weight. Then silence. He lay pinned in the gathering darkness, the roars fading into whimpers. He reached out with a trembling hand and felt warm fur, the shallow breaths of exertion. Jabari nudged him gently, then collapsed beside him, a final, shuddering sigh escaping his old warrior's body. He closed his eyes. The war wasn't over. His death would likely be seen as a victory by the Xylan, their broadcast twisted to break the spirit of those he protected. But seeds were sown, hidden places thrived outside the alien's grasp. The war would continue, in whispers, in shadows, in the enduring hope of a shattered world. And perhaps, somewhere, a child would hear the story of the Lionsender, a story of defiance, of sacrifice, and of a love that transcended even the vast gulf between species. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough.